we all know that COVID-19 has altered, our normal standard way of living, and it has, created a new world order, an order where people, now you have to go around wearing masks, where some are still even under lockdown, and all these things have been realities that we have seen under the COVID-19, and it's one of the most tragic years of our lifetimes where we have lost, a lot of people, and due to this global pandemic. So it's important for us now, that now that we are there to, revisit, our livelihood and focus more on the human rights aspect to see what has changed, what has altered, and how best can we answer the critical questions that have risen because of this pandemic. So this is the thrust of this discussion, to give more light of the human rights at a global level. So that's why we're joined by speakers from representing, different parts of the globe. So with more focus on, the human rights in the times of emergency. To just give a minute to each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and before we actually start to their main presentations. So I'll call upon Caroline to introduce yourself in just 1 minute, and then we'll proceed in that particular order. Caroline, are you there?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Caroline Usikpedo. I'm the Executive Director and the founder of Noble Delta Women for Peace and Development International. We are based in Nigeria. We work on human rights, women's rights, women empowerment, work on energy and climate change issues and health-related issues. Thank you.
Ashley, you're muted.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Now I'll call upon Martina to just introduce yourself in just 1 minute.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you for everyone participating. And my name is Martina, and I'm from Malta, Vice President for the European Students' Union that's based in Brussels and in Belgium. And ESU is the umbrella organization, the Regis Student Union, that represents 45 national unions of students from 40 different countries. And we represent not only the educational interests of students, but also the social, political, and cultural interests of around 20 million students in and around Europe. And I'm very pleased to be on this panel today. I was the Human Rights and Solidarity Coordinator for ESU since 2019 until I changed now to Vice President last month. So I'm excited to contribute to this panel. Thank you.
Congratulations, Martina, on your election as the Vice President. I'll now call upon Oli Nawako. Please forgive my pronunciation. I'm sure you will be able to explain, to pronounce it much better than me. So I'm calling upon Oli Betinawako. I think it's the president of Ethiopian Higher and Education Institute. Seems he hasn't joined us. So I'll proceed to call upon Kamara Osman Bika to just introduce himself in a minute.
Hello, I'm Usman Bikal Kamara. I'm from Sierra Leone. I was president of the National Union of Sierra Leone Students between 2016 and 2017. I'm also an executive committee member at ASU, representing the West African region. I studied at Fabi College. I graduated with a BA Honours in English in 2011. I later enrolled for law and I graduated in 2018 with an LLB honors, second class first division. I'm also actively involved in the politics of my country. I'm a member of the main opposition party. And quite recently, you know, um, I've been serving as Secretary General for a movement that seeks to put the internal politics of my political party on a democratic path. And to a very large extent, we've succeeded because a date has now been set to have a democratic constitution adopted in the next couple of months.
Thank you
That's,
very much, Pika. It's a very great introduction. I see a great man where you come from, and I know what you are going to submit will be very great ideas that will assist a lot of millions of young people and makers across the globe. Now call upon Takudzo Ngadziore, one of our panelists, to introduce himself in just a minute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. My name is Takuzwa Ngazore, the president of the Zimbabwe National Students Union, the chairperson of the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition Youth Committee, and a former GZQ Student Representative Council president. I guess that serves my 1 minute. Thank you, moderator.
Yes, thank you very much, and everyone who managed to join us in this session. I don't want to waste much of our time. I want the panelists to unpack and deliver the very sweet and very thoughtful ideas that they have prepared for us. So without wasting much of our time, I'll start with the Caroline. The question that we have, it's the human rights are very important to all of us and to all the groups that we have in this particular country. We are at some point, identified as groups in a sense. So I would like you to just, explain in a few the impacts of COVID, the impacts that COVID-19 has had on marginalized groups such as refugees, which is an important aspect in this particular moment, with the manner that COVID-19 has shaped the world. So I would like you to just give us, a thoughtfully analysis of how COVID-19 has played a role in in the sector of refugees.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Start with the emergence of COVID-19 has brought a very negative impact on the African continent, even around the world. And on assessing impacts, we also want to know that even though COVID-19 has no vaccine yet that is being used to treat it, it continues to pose a very serious threat to rights to health because the people are living without good health facilities. There are no infrastructural development. There are lack of governance policies that even address people accessing major health facilities. The failures of our economic and social policy are making the dangerous fragilities of provide for people. And then the situation of the refugees are even worse than what we think about because they don't even have access to food. There is no access to basic amenities like water and sanitation, no good hygiene. So COVID-19 came to Africa, came to the whole world to impact a lot of lives negatively. We are faced with human rights abuses. We will not even talk about the police brutality ranging from Nigeria to other countries. We're talking about the lives that have been lost during these processes in trying to access medical care. The vulnerability, lies on the whole of Africa, not even just the refugees alone. Moreover, people are forced to face insecurity during this COVID-19 pandemic. The emergence has come not only to turn the new world order, but to disorganize and destabilize whatever that has been in place. We have a lot of cases of sexual and gender-based violence. The most gender-based violence in African region is this year, and that is the emergence of COVID-19. When you have couples who are not used to living together 24 hours, were forced to be in the same house due to lockdowns. So what do you expect? They see their faults and a lot of problems, a lot of battering, a lot of molestation, and even looking at child molestation. Small girls are being defied. You have 2-year-olds, you have even 6-month-old defilement. A lot of increase, a lot of human rights abuses has come about the emergence of COVID-19. We have witnessed undue restrictions because speaking out has become a taboo in the system, and the governments, they are copying from their colleagues. Once a restriction taking it up, there is no freedom of association, no the media reporting the true situation of COVID-19 and its impacts on. Have a lot of cases that needs to be addressed, even as and how do we now build back better? We must begin to think as the next generation. The youth, that is the only way they can take up what belongs to them, because their voices must be heard at this time. The decision makers, they are not young people. And if we are not careful, whatever decisions that are placed on the table is what they will have to live with in the next generation. So we have to build back our better in a system that impacts even the environment that we live in. Because we have COVID-19 today, another crisis may erupt because climate change is creating a lot of threats on the African continent, which is the most hardest hit. We need to begin to look at all these things. We have our rights to live. We have our rights to everything that makes us as a human being. And we must also begin to look at the rights to education. What has done at the schools that were locked down, that were used as refugee camps, have they been built back for people, for our children to go back to school? What has been done? Has the school been fumigated against the virus for the children not contacting it? Should they return back? A whole year is being lost in the continent due to COVID-19. So we need to start to call for a stop on this violation of human rights, a stop for any policy that is not friendly, any policy that imposes undue hardship on the African continent is what we must guide against. I will not forget to mention even the acute poverty and hunger that COVID-19 imposed on everyone. And we have governments who lock up whatever palliative that was to be meant to be distributed to people. We are even locked in warehouses, not minding if they will spoil and then get wasted. We need to be human friendly. So we have to start to call our governments to order so that they listen, that as we are going to build back the better, as we are coming into the new system of, and they should also look at the economic growth of African continent. Let me end here for now.
Thank you very much, Caroline, with such great submissions. I must say I've, learned a lot and I resonate with a lot of things, particularly when we spoke about the education sector. We have around SADC, schools started to open and cases are starting to rise in institutions. So it's a very critical issue to start, the conversation of how do we disinfect, these affected institutions. So, moving forward is still on that a particular issue. I'll just draw attention to Martina to what has been the impact of the pandemic on the issues of child labor, you know, realizing how the world has been altered. So I'll call upon Martina to just speak briefly on this particular issue.
Thank you for the floor, and thank you for the chance to be part of this discussion. The pandemic has presented a very, very big threat, a very urgent threat to the rights of children. And I'd like to draw on the report of the 100 million campaign on a fair share for children. And I think it's very important for people, especially student activists and youth activists, to look this up, read it, and use it as a lobby tool. Because it highlights three factors, three very aggravating in child labor, and that's first and foremost that we saw the closure of schools during the pandemic. Secondly, the rise in unemployment, and third, the rise in poverty and the inadequacy of social protection structures that has resulted in a number of families being pushed into poverty. And this has then led that children and young people are now paying the highest price during the pandemic. Millions of children are expected to drop out and be forced in child labor in order to make up for the lost household income. And what's worrisome is that even if lockdown measures are lifted, not just return to normal as we've seen it before. It takes a lot of hard work then and hard effort to get back to the situation where we were, where we hope to be achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and education for all. What I'd like to move on to is to what needs to be done now to address this pressing matter. And in fact, with the 100 million and through our cooperation with the 100 million, we begin to understand as student activists that, yeah, the world has enough knowledge, it has enough money, because we see money going into corporations to protect their profit. So how can there not be enough money then to ensure that everyone can access their basic and fundamental human rights? This is the question that we are now pressing together. And it's quite sad when you see it in the context of the G20 Leaders Summit that was held back in November. It's quite disappointing. There were quite disappointing outcomes in the fact that we do not see sufficient political will and actions being taken to meet the urgent challenges that vulnerable children and young people are facing. There was a 4.5 billion shortfall in the funds necessary for distribution to the poorest countries. And the agreement to extend that was only done until mid-2021. That is very, very short time period. This will not be long enough for countries to get back on their feet. It's not enough for their economies to be rebuilt, and it's not enough for them to provide essential public services, including education and healthcare, even though we see how post-pandemic. So I'd like to also add a contribution in this coming from the global north. It's that the richest countries have a much larger responsibility to play in this crisis they are not playing, and in two major fields. Primarily, we must not allow that official development assistance budgets shrink in this time, especially from the richest countries. They need to be the ones that are providing more support. And secondly, that is also a reason why they should be the ones that are providing more support here is that the global north must accept their complicity in supply chains, in the abuse of the supply chains and the abuse of people and child labor. And this can be done, and I speak as a student activist myself. It's not about merely boycotting these practices, but there needs to be more strategic effort into changing policies and legislations. And I'll give one example that is a European child as a child laborer, they can get prosecuted. But if the company in Europe uses a child labor from India or from Ghana, they can face no convictions for that. So there's a huge gap in policies and legislation that we need to address. And in all of this, in understanding this, that we understand as well that there's no excuse for children to be forced into work instead of returning to school. And if we allow this to happen, it's a failure of our leadership, it's a failure of humanity, and it's a failure of our collective power. We are facing a humanitarian crisis, but we're also facing a leadership crisis. We see this, and the most vulnerable and marginalized feel this in the hardest and most harshest way. When leaders cite that they say it, that they protect their citizens, but then in reality, they fall short and they're simply protecting their own autocratic rule. They and we see this most harshly when we see a clampdown on civil liberties. We're seeing that there's a very reduced and limited space for us as student and youth activists and civil society activists to associate together, to raise our voice. And it's sort of all a way to create this culture of fear between us, and you see this specifically when student and youth activists are arbitrarily detained or prosecuted for even peacefully dissenting against political measures. So it's our job now, or our responsibility, or our opportunity. It could also be looked at as an opportunity for us to take a stand and show better leadership. We have the mandate for us as student representatives to speak on behalf of our most vulnerable and marginalized peer. We are especially from my point of view, that I speak from a more privileged position, can and must demand more. And our political will needs to be transformed more from will and more into strategizing together. And in this way, by working together, especially in the spirit of internationalization and solidarity, and through our cooperation, through the Global Students Forum, to the Global Campaign for Education, through 100 million, we can fight this indifference, this culture of fear, and create more of a culture of support and a way to take action together. And this is sort of what I wanted to highlight in this respect, in not just the issues that we're facing on child labor, but also the multiple issues that the panelists here are speaking of. So thank you very much for this time, and I'm really open to hearing more of the contributions of the rest of the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina, for the great submissions. I'm very much happy that you mentioned the 100 million campaign, which has been doing a great job, especially to that particular aspect, speaking about children's rights. You've seen a lot of, excellent work. It remains as one of the outstanding institutions when it comes to children's rights. Thank you very much. You've raised a lot of critical issues to do with changing the policies and legislations, so that we advance this particular cause. So, around the issue of human rights, since everyone was under lockdown and, people had to spend time, within, confined areas, I'm directing this question and this discussion to Takudzwa Gadziore to say, what impact has the pandemic had on domestic violence? So Takudzwa, if you can,
Thank you very much. I think I already introduced myself, and in response to the topic which has been given by the moderator, Ashley Funye. I would want to say COVID-19 has become a cancer to the society. COVID-19, of course, it's a pandemic to the whole world and the global setup, but we ought to escalated issues pertaining to domestic violence, issues regarding to human rights abuse were mentioned, and also other related issues. It's a clear sign that COVID-19 has shown how Africa is defining leadership as the accumulation of power more than the assumption of responsibility. It's a clear sign that COVID-19 is also showed that Africa is being led by people who are ideologically vacuous and crocodile liberators who are just there to speak for themselves when the citizens are supposed to be standing and speaking through the issues which are happening in society. So in response to the topic which is at hand, I would want to say, of course, domestic issues are happening and these in this time of COVID-19 because we have had the imposition of lockdowns in most of our countries and nations. In Zimbabwe per se, the lockdown is still there, and you tend to see that people ought to interact, of which we need to understand that people are diverse and they have different characters. So for them to cohabitate, for them to relate, for them to stay together and be peaceful during a time when there are issues at hand, economic issues, social issues, political issues, if I may say to be brief, still issues, it intend to be normal when COVID-19 is supposed to be the pandemic that we are dealing with. We have also cases in which we do not have enough for us to make sure that we eat during this pandemic. We have had cases in which poverty has become much of our DNA in Africa. We have nations in which the unemployment rate is more than 98%, for example, in our own country, Zimbabwe. And if you check the cases which were being highlighted, police brutality cases from Nigeria, they are a reflection of society which is decaying from dusk to dawn, and of which we are supposed to be on the forefront, to be reacting, on the forefront, to be fighting, because if we don't, we ought to remind of ourselves that we have a generational mandate, which Franz Fanon, of course, says that you ought to choose whether you are going to fulfill it or we are going to betray it. And it's upon us as the student activists to make sure that we fulfill the cause. It's upon us to make sure that we fight on. It's upon us to make sure that we are outspoken in response to the issues which are affecting us. I also want to give a reflection of the domestic issues which we are facing in Zimbabwe, which I believe that for our nation to succeed, it ought to be requesting or on the test or quest for the 5 pillars, which are number one, truth, reconciliation, and forgiveness. Number two, but I would want to say on number one, there are cases in which we have had people being killed. Talk of the current election in Uganda. Students are also dying. You also want to highlight brutality, the cases of violence, state-sponsored. We are in a period of GBV, but the truth need to be said that we are being led by degreed bandits. So that truth is important. Then we reconcile, then we forgive each other because there are much wounds in Africa. And number two, social and economic reform is needed going forward in response to the domestic question. Then number three, you ought to look at CAC, Citizen Action Against Corruption. You also need to look at uh, healthcare for all. Then we need to look at the last one, which is text to educate. So I've given the 5 pillars, which we believe can also be a solution to the crisis which we are facing. But also, I would give a reflection of the increased human rights abuses, unjust arrests, cases of abduction and torture. I myself, having been a victim of such state-sponsored violence, being arrested for a week at first, then followed by 1 month in prison after being tortured and heavily assaulted by the regime. So it's a clear sign that we ought to fight on, we ought to stand, because it's either we will die fighting than die on our knees. It's either we choose to be known as a generation of people who decided to ignore their mandate or we be known as a generation which understood the mandate which was in front of them and started to react to the pertinent and important issues of our own society. So I guess it's a reflection of a decayed society, which we are supposed to start working up. There is a statement which says the old is dying and the new cannot be born, but we are denying as student activists that the new cannot be born. We need to be born, we need to fight. And I believe we have had more than 30 students being arrested in Zimbabwe, actually more than 50 actually being arrested, trying to voice out, and it's all reflects on such issues. And I think to conclude my presentation, I would want to encourage much of us as community, much of us as the regional solidarity platform, to start standing in solidarity with each other, whilst we are fighting regimes which are dictatorial in terms of operating, in terms of their systems, regimes which believe that what they know and what they say is right, and we are all wrong. So we need to make sure that we stand by ourselves, united we will stand, but divided we will fall. So solidarity is the way to go. Ideology.
Thank you very much,
Is the way to
Taku.
go.
Thank you very much, Taku, for such a wonderful and revolutionary presentation. Very, very insightful. Speaking about how COVID-19 has changed the whole context of human rights, and we have seen how governments have gone beyond just the ordinary measures to manage COVID-19, to going beyond and fostering political expediency over the lives of the people. This has been the case with a lot of African countries and with a lot of countries that we have seen, especially some that we're having political processes. All these things have been stopped. And, the violence that we have witnessed during the COVID-19 has extended, even the governments themselves, they have tended to be more violent in policies and violent in terms of, the physical violence in disciplining and, attacking their citizens. So the states have devoted their own people. And, speaking about that, the governments have done a lot of things, during the COVID-19. And to you, Olipedane Wako, I would just, ask to say, were there excesses, and to what extent governments have tried by all means to introduce, a different methods and different mechanisms of combating COVID-19. So I'm just calling upon Oli Bedani Wako to speak, and address us. Is he? Hello, Oli. I think the mic is unmuted, but we're not getting the sound. Hello, Oli. Okay, I think whilst she's hello? Hello? I think while he's preparing, Oli, can you, I think he's facing some connectivity challenges, network challenges. So I'll just ask him whilst he's preparing to give us this excellent presentation. I will call upon Bikau, to speak about, we have faced a lot of human rights violations. We have tried to embrace the new world order. And these are not, easy tasks. These are very trying times that, humans have to adapt to in a short period of time. So, actual, and I would like to say, going forward, what should be done to minimize these abuses to human rights that we have witnessed, during the COVID-19 era, and going beyond? How can us as citizens play a role in making sure that, we reduce the human rights violations that we have witnessed during the COVID-19?
Okay, thank you so much, Ashley. Of course, my country, Sierra Leone, has witnessed a lot of human rights violations since the start of the pandemic. In fact, on the 24th of March 2020, Sierra Leone made history. It became, so far as I know, the only country in the world to pass a 12-month state of public emergency to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. That is the longest stretch of a public emergency being proclaimed by any country in the world. And of course, it means a lot to human rights, because when it comes to public emergency violations, rights are the victims. Now, in virtue of our constitution, the state of emergency has authorized the president to make regulations, and take other measures that he deem necessary and expedient to deal with the pandemic. There's also another section that's listed, section 5, section 29, subsection 5.6, listed the powers vested on the president to take measures during the state of emergency period. And those powers range from unlawful detention, seizing property, and even suspending any law which, in the opinion of the president, is necessary. So, of course, such enormous powers, have human rights, have consequences. For example, our history is replete with examples wherein states of emergencies have been traditionally used by leaders to suppress dissent, stifle protest, and target opposition leaders. The history is widespread. In the TRC report that was set up, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee that was set up just after the war, it clearly stated how the then President Joseph Saido Momo exercised his state of emergency powers in an abusive and authoritarian manner. And we also saw in 2014 when the former President Ernest Bai Koroma, declared a state of emergency to combat the Ebola pandemic, because Ebola was so widespread in Sierra Leone. Also abused to target opposition members, stifle protest. For example, there was an 18-year-old boy killed during a student protest that concerned itself with the closure of Jala University. We also saw during that period leaders of two opposition parties. We now have another state of a 12-month-long state of emergency to combat the coronavirus pandemic. By our laws, the president is required, through the Attorney General, is required to submit regulations that have to do with the corona, the state that are applicable during the state of emergency period. Being that the president has the power to suspend any law, it is required by law to submit regulations. But up to this time, no regulation has been submitted, has been presented to Parliament, and it is well past over 6 months now. So we are having a state of emergency in which there are no regulations. So you can imagine, the enormous powers the president and other stakeholders now have to execute and to carry out any form of abuse. In ordinary time, when there was no state of emergency, for example, a police will be required to present a search warrant issued by a magistrate before he can search your house. But now, no search warrant is required, and it means it has far-reaching implications, especially if you are a journalist, an activist, and an oppositionist. So I think that abuses of this nature are to be prevented. Is that I know almost every country in the world has a state of emergency clause in its constitution. So there is nothing unusual about giving the president powers to take certain measures that are absolutely necessary to tackle an existential threat. But the major problem in us is that, and I know for some other countries, is that it is open to abuse. And the fact that it is open to abuse means politicians can use it to suppress opponents. So I think the one way in which this can be avoided is to ensure that states of emergency declarations, whether for health or security reasons, must have guidelines from both. Those guidelines must be in line with both national and international law. Those guidelines must not be allowed to override fundamental human rights. So even though leaders will be given the powers to take certain of this nature, but they must be enjoined to ensure that those laws are in line with international laws and national laws that guarantee fundamental human rights. And the measures must also not be taken to target particular groups, because that is the norm in most African countries. Following the election in Uganda, seeing how coronavirus rules have been used to target members of the opposition, but the same has not been applicable when it comes to the ruling party. So we think the law must not be made to target specific individuals. And I also believe that the whatever restrictions taken must be motivated by a legitimate desire to promote the health and security goals. So these are the measures I think states have to be taken. The citizens must also be very involved in demanding for the enormous powers given to our leaders in periods of emergencies to be curtailed. Yes, I think we need that kind of citizen involvement in things like this. And the laws must be consistent with other obligations of the states under international law, because most of these states are signatories to international laws that guarantee fundamental human rights. So whatever regulations they make during this period must also be in conformity with fundamental human rights guaranteed under international law.
Breakout,
Yeah.
we have to interrupt you because of our time. I'll give, we have already run out of time, but I'm sure ASU will consider compensating our time because they started the meeting late. So
Yeah.
I'll call
Okay.
upon, I see he's now back, he has joined us, and I'll just call him to make a quick presentation, and then we go forward. Oli, your question, as I spoke earlier when we're following, to say, were the excesses in the enforcement of the lockdown, and to what extent? So I direct this question to you. If you can just in few words, in the interest of time, just, unpack that for us. Hello, Oli. Hello.
Yeah, thank you very much for being with you. Hello, hello.
We can hear you.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, we can hear you. Please proceed. Hello, Oli. Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Hello, dear.
Yes, we
Yeah,
can hear you.
I'm hearing the voice is not hearing.
Can you please proceed?
Hello.
Can you proceed with your presentation?
Hello.
I think we have a network problem.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm really to be with. Yeah, I hope.
I think what we can do, I think we can, Oli, you can, I will liaise with the ASU team so that you can have your presentation, you know, like you can write it down and we can have the ASU team publish it for the benefit.
Thank you very much. My presentation. Yeah, what's exceeding the enforcement of lockdown and to what extent to that to present and in I will see it in my country context and then
Hello, Oli. I think what we can do, I don't know if there's anyone from the technical team of ASU, we can have Oli write down his presentation and it can be published for the benefit of everyone who was, you know, waiting eagerly to hear, you know, the excellent conversation that he was going to bring. So I think anyone from ASU team can assist us in that regard so that we can have his presentation, you know, being published probably in written form, because those are one of the struggles that, you know, we are speaking about when we speak about human rights. To say some we do not have clear access to some of the things. So I think for now, what we can do is thank you very much for attending this panel. It was a great session that spoke fundamentally on the rights that, you know, we have confronted and that have been limited. I was hoping that one of the panelists will speak fundamentally about the right to movement, freedom of movement. Now we are locked. We can't even meet, you know, in wherever we're supposed to meet this year. So these are some of the rights that we have that COVID-19 has altered and violated in our faces. So we have a lot of rights, the right to health, which has been a major right that has been affected by the pandemic. So even the right to education itself, students have closed the calendars, the academic calendar has been closed for the whole year and nothing has been done. Knowledge hasn't been transferred and knowledge hasn't been produced in a lot of institutions. So these are the actual realities that COVID-19 has brought to an extent that life itself has been threatened. So I thank you very much. Thank you, the panelists. They raised a lot of I'm sure you learned one or two things from this great panel. And going forward, I hope that we'll meet again. And as human rights fighters and defenders, we'll continue to do the excellent work that we are doing in all our places, in our respective places. So until we meet again, thank you very much, colleagues. I'm sorry we didn't have time to give, questions because of our limited time. You know, this is now the Google generation. We're now using technology. So I'm sure time is much more limited. So thank you very much, colleagues. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Enjoy the rest of the summit. Cheers.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.